All right, so I got a Joe Manchin clip for you guys here that is really just one of the most frustrating clips that I've seen throughout the entirety of this infrastructure negotiation process that we have been keeping up with. And listen, it's a really short clip, but somehow Joe Manchin still manages to be wrong about everything in how he frames this entire conversation. So he was on Fox News and he did this little interview where he's talking about the extent to which he would be willing to go on an infrastructure bill that would be a partisan one. We have the dual track process that Joe Biden is still trying to force through right now, even though it's not working. You have the shitty bipartisan bill that they are negotiating right now and finalizing that they're going to be passing with Republicans. That's just a terrible bill that will basically just privatize our infrastructure. It's not a good bill. But he's talking about in this clip the bipartisan one, which is supposed to be the more bold one that would appease the left, if you want to say. So here's what he had to say about that.
If the reconciliation bill they're envisioning on the progressive side is 4 to 6 trillion, you're not going with that.
I don't think I could ever get there to that. I don't think that not unless we just throw caution to the wind on the tax code and could care less. Are we competing in a global market and are we being fair? That you just throw that out the window. That seems to me is totally out of the ballpark.
All right, so again, very short clip, but still managed to be completely wrong about everything that he's talking about in this clip. So I got a number of things that I got to say. First of all, the easiest thing to point out is polls show broad support for tax hikes on the wealthy and big corporations. So what he's doing here is not politically smart, right? It's not only not economically smart. We just had that ProPublica expose or report that came out that basically said billionaires are shafting you on taxes. They're not paying any income taxes. And so obviously polls like this, right? This isn't a mystery, okay? People want you to raise taxes on the rich. In fact, there were polls that came out towards the beginning negotiations of this infrastructure package that said that originally the tax increases on the wealthy and corporations were the most popular part of the infrastructure bill. So it doesn't make sense from a political angle. Now, point number 2, Exxon lobbyist brags about regular access to Joe Manchin. So we just had this report come out a couple days ago now, I think it was, where an Exxon lobbyist was basically tricked into thinking he was doing a job interview and revealed a lot of shit that he probably shouldn't have revealed. So part of that was he revealed that he is having regular, or Exxon and these other fossil fuel companies are having regular meetings with Joe Manchin and other corporate Democrats in order to get them to water down this bill. So I don't even know why Joe Manchin is able to go on Fox News. Well, of course it's Fox News, but Joe Manchin should not be able to show his face, let alone comment on these infrastructure negotiations without this question being brought up to him. How are you just ignoring this? We literally just had an Exxon lobbyist get caught on tape revealing not only just that he's talking to Manchin, but explicitly revealing their strategy. The strategy of these big fossil fuel companies, because they don't want us to adequately invest in climate legislation, their strategy is to get Joe Manchin and people like Joe Manchin to go on outlets like Fox News and MSNBC and CNN and talk about how, oh, well, we just can't afford it. What he just said in that clip is literally a line taken from ExxonMobil, okay? It's the exact line that the lobbyist was talking about in the clip. They want them to push for a smaller package and emphasize how are we going to pay for it, because the end result of that will be a watered down, less significant package where they'll cut out a lot of the climate legislation, and that will help ExxonMobil. They also don't want, obviously, the tax increases. So he is literally verbatim using the lines that Exxon lobbyist was just describing that they're feeding him. So how the fuck is this man able to go on national television and not have to answer for this shit? It's just brazen out in the open corruption, but still the entire media ecosystem, the mainstream media ecosystem, is still talking about these negotiations as if they're happening in good faith. They're not happening in good faith. Joe Manchin is not representing his constituents. He's representing ExxonMobil, and other fossil fuel companies. So it's just ridiculous, the entire framing of this discussion. This should be the first thing that he has to answer whenever he shows his face, let alone talks about the infrastructure plan. He's not negotiating in good faith, period. So that should be the first thing. And that's the second main point that I wanted to get. Third main point that I wanted to get. These people, Joe Manchin, corporate Democrats, really the entirety of the Democratic Party, and even progressives like Bernie Sanders, they don't understand how federal spending works, or they do understand, but they're not willing to talk about it in the ways necessary, okay? If you haven't read Stephanie Kilton's book on modern monetary theory, I suggest you go read it, okay? Her book's called The Deficit Myth, by the way. But basically what she outlines is that Federal spending is not like spending in your household. It's not like spending even at the state or the local level, okay? They are currency users. The federal government is a currency issuer, meaning the federal government does not have to tax X amount of dollars in order to spend X amount of dollars. They can just spend, and when it's something like infrastructure, it pays for itself. Why? Because when you invest in infrastructure, you're expanding economic sectors, you're improving efficiency, you're creating new jobs. That pays for itself down the line. Okay, so this entire narrative of them framing this discussion as if, well, you would have to raise taxes on the corporations, and how are we going to compete in a global market if you do that? You don't even have to do that. You literally do not even have to do that. You don't have to raise taxes on corporations. You should, and the reason why I think you should is because they're not paying their fair share relative to other Americans. But the reason why you should tax corporations is not because you need that money to pay for infrastructure. That's not how this entire discussion should be framed, and yet they still don't understand that. So again, the entire framing of this discussion is bullshit from the outset. Now, on top of that, this is just straight up not enough, okay? Even the upper estimate of what they were just talking about in that clip, 6 trillion. They said I think it was 4 trillion to 6 trillion is what's being considered. 6 trillion over 8 years is not enough. Okay, that's not enough for what the scientists are telling us we need to adequately invest in climate change legislation. It's also not enough based on what the American Society for Civil Engineers, the actual experts on this issue, estimate that we need. They estimated that we needed by 2025 about over $1 trillion a year invested in order to bring our infrastructure up to a grade of a B+. So if you want our infrastructure to just not be crumbling, not an A+ where it's really, really good and it's something for the entire world to envy, but if you just want our infrastructure to not be crumbling, you need at least $1 trillion per year. So over 8 years, $6 trillion wouldn't even be enough in and of itself. And he's laughing at that. He's laughing at that proposal as if West Virginians don't desperately need infrastructure investments. Okay, West Virginia infrastructure is among the worst, if not the single worst, in the entire country. And this man, Joe Manchin, is going out there pretending like he's representing his constituents. He's not representing his constituents. So that's what I want you guys to understand, okay? This doesn't make any sense from any angle. And the entire narrative, the underlying framework of how they're having these discussions is nonsense. Nobody's asking him about the Exxon lobbyist leak where he basically said, yeah, we're bribing Joe Manchin and other corporate Democrats to go out and feed our lines to you. Nobody's asking him about that. Nobody's talking about the fact that it's overwhelmingly popular to tax the rich. Nobody's talking about the fact that you don't even need to fucking tax the rich X amount in order to spend X amount. Infrastructure pays for itself. Nobody's talking about these things in the mainstream media. So the entire conversation, the entire debate around this infrastructure deal is completely warped. It's warped in a right-wing direction. And that's why we're having these conversations about having a shitty, watered down $500 million or half a $1 trillion infrastructure investment bipartisan, and then combine that with what, $1 trillion, less than $1 trillion in a partisan one. This is just bullshit. It's complete bullshit. People need to start calling these out, start calling out these talking points. And honestly, if you're a member of the squad and you have the platform to go after somebody like Joe Manchin, talk about these calls and call them out directly. Talk about the fact that Joe Manchin is taking weekly calls with ExxonMobil. Okay, talk about the fact that he's not representing his conservative constituents who desperately need infrastructure. He's representing corporations.